The Top 14 is a rugby union club competition that is played in France, created in 1892. The Top 14 is at the top of the National League system, operated by the French National Rugby League, also known by its French initialism of LNR. There is promotion and relegation between the Top 14 and the next level down, the Rugby Pro D2. The 14 best rugby teams in France participate in the competition, hence the name Top 14. The competition was previously known as the Top 16. The first ever final took place in 1892, between two Paris-based sides, Stade Français and Racing Club, with the latter becoming the inaugural champions. The competition has been held on an annual basis since, except from 1915 to 1919, because of World War I, and from 1940 to 1942. Because of World War II. Toulouse is the most successful club in the competition with 19 titles. History. Early years. The first competition was held in 1892 as a one-off championship game between the Racing Club de France and Stade Français. The Racing Club defeated Stade Français 4-3 to win the first ever title, though the Stadists got the revenge the following year in a repeat of the final. The match official for that first final was Pierre de Coubertin. Stade Français would go on to win a number of titles thereafter. The 1897 and 1898 series were awarded on a points system after a round-robin. Although the competition was called the French Championship, entry was confined to Parisian clubs. The 1899 season was the first to include clubs from outside of Paris, and led to Stade Bordelais winning the final that season, which was also played outside of Paris, in Le Bouscat. For the following decade, the championship game would usually end up being contested by the Racing Club, Stade Français and Stade Bordelais, with Stade Bordelais actually winning 5 titles during this period. During this time the final was usually held in various stadia around Paris, with the exception of 1903 and 1909 where it was held in Toulouse, as SOE Toulouse and Stade Toulousain were finalists respectively. The competition was then won by a number of different clubs before World War I, with teams like FC Lyon, Stade Toulousain, Aviron Bayonnais and USA Perpignan claiming the first titles. Between the wars, due to the war, operations were suspended for a number of years. In its place, a competition known as the Coupe de l'Espérance was held, which consisted mostly of young boys who had not yet been drafted. The competition was held 4 times but is not normally considered a full championship. The normal competition returned for the 1920 season, and Stade Tarbes became the first post-war champions, defeating the Racing Club in the final. During the 1920s, Stade Toulousain would create its now famous rugby history, winning 5 championships during the decade. USA Perpignan would also win 2 championships. During the 1930s the championship game was held only in Bordeaux and Toulouse. The 1930 championship game, won by Aigun over US Quillan, was the first final to go into extra time. It would also see Toulon and Lyon OU win the first championship games. During the latter part of the decade, RC Narbonne, CS Vienne and Perpignan all won titles, and Biarritz Olympique were champions in both 1935 and 1939. Post-war, after the war, the championship final returned to Paris, and was played at Parc des Princes for the next 4 seasons. The competition during the 1940s was won by a number of different teams, though Castres won in 1949, and then again in 1950. FC Lourdes would become a dominant club during the 1950s, winning 5 championships, and another in 1960. Aigun would go on to win 3 titles during the 1960s as well. Lourdes were also the champions of the 1968 season, but due to the May 1968 events, the finale was played 3 weeks behind normal schedule. At the end of regulation time, the score was tied at 6-6, and then 9-9 after extra time. Lourdes were declared champions because they had scored 2 tries to Toulon's none, and also because it was impossible to reschedule a third final so late, as the French national team were to leave on a tour to New Zealand and South Africa. Although Béziers won the first championship in the 1961 season, it would be the 1970s which would see a golden era for the club, as they would win 10 championships between 1971 and 1984, as well as being runners-up in 1976. Also in the mid-1970s, after being held in Toulouse, Lyon and Bordeaux in recent years, the championship final was taken to Parc des Princes on a permanent basis. During the rest of the 1980s, Toulouse were the dominant team, winning the championship in 1985, 1986 and 1989. Toulon won in 1987, and Aigun won in 1988. Into the professional era, the first match of the 1990s went into extra time, as the Racing Club defeated Aigun, winning the first championship since 1959. Bordeaux Beagles, Gironde, Toulon, Castres and Toulouse would win the following finals. The 1990s also saw the game of rugby union go professional following the 1995 Rugby World Cup in South Africa. This also led to the establishment of the European Heineken Cup. Including the 1994 victory, Toulouse won 4 championships in succession. For the 1998 season, the final was moved to the newly constructed Stade de France, the new national stadium. The final, played in front of 78,000, saw Stade Français win the first championship since 1908. Rising popularity. The competition saw an enormous rise in popularity in 2005-06, with attendance rising to an average of 9,600, up by 25% from 2004-05, and numerous sellouts. On the 15th of October 2005, Stade Français drew a crowd of 79,502 at Stade de France for the home match against Toulouse. This broke the previous French attendance record for a regular season league match in any sport by over 20,000. That record was broken on the 4th of March 2006, when Stade Français drew 79,604 to a rematch of the 2004-05 final against Biarritz at Stade de France. It was broken again on the 14th of October 2006 with 79,619 as the same 2 opponents met, and a fourth time on the 27th of January 2007, with 79,741 for another Stade Français Toulouse match. During the regular season 2010-2011, the average attendance per match reached 14,184. In 2011, Canal Plus indicated that evening matches were being watched by 800,000–850,000 viewers, while afternoon matches were watched by around 700,000 viewers. In recent years, numerous foreign players have joined top 14 teams. Current teams. 2016-17 season. Economic strength of the clubs. Over the recent years, the top 14 has seen the economic strength of its clubs rise significantly, helped with high attendances, large TV rights contracts, public subsidies and the rise of the euro exchange rate. Top 14 clubs have seen their overall spending budget increase significantly. In 2011-2012, 4 clubs had a budget over €20 million. Toulouse, Clermont, Racing Metro, Stade Francais. The average salary of players in the top 14 were estimated to have risen, in 2010, to an average of $153,700. The wealth of the top 14 clubs has led them to attract a large number of international players and to build teams with more strength in depth. 2 recent changes in regulation may somewhat limit this economic growth. First, the French government repealed the law known as DIC the 1st of July 2010. This law allowed all member clubs in French professional sports organizations to treat 30% of each player's salary as image rights. This portion of players' salaries was thus exempt from France's high payroll and social insurance taxes. Second, to control the growth of club spending, the LNR introduced a salary cap in the top 14 in the 2010-11 season. Under the provisions of the cap, team payrolls was limited to €8 million. This is in addition to an existing requirement that wage bills be no more than 50% of a team's turnover. However, the €8 million cap was only 5% greater than the highest official wage bill in the 2009-10 top 14, and translated to £7.1 million at the time the cap was announced, well above the English Premiership's then current £4 million cap. For the season 2011-2012, the LNR raised the salary cap to €8.7 million. Since then, the cap has risen still further, to €10 million starting in 2013-14 and continuing through 2015-16. Additionally, the cap now excludes youth players whose salaries are no more than €50,000. At the same time as LNR announced the salary cap, it also announced new rules requiring a minimum percentage of French players on club rosters. Players qualifying under these rules, referred to in French as GIFF, must have been registered with the FFR for at least 5 years before turning 23, or have spent 3 seasons in an FFR-approved training center before turning 21. Original plans were to require 50% GIFFs in 2010-11, but protests from leading clubs led to a reduction to 40% for that season. Initially, the 50% quota was to be met in 2011-12 and 60% in 2012-13, but a compromise with the clubs saw no change to the limit until 2013-14, at which time it increased to 55%. Additionally, effective in 2015-16, LNR was allowed to fine clubs that did not have a minimum of 12 GIFFs in the matchday squads. These regulations, however, do not consider eligibility to play for the French national team. For example, although the Armitage brothers all represented England internationally, they qualified as GIFF because of the tenure in Nice's youth setup. On the other hand, recent France international Jérôme Thion, despite being a native and lifelong resident of France, did not qualify because he switched from basketball to rugby too late in his youth. While the most visible critics of the change in policy were wealthy club owners such as Mourad Boujalal of Toulon and Max Guazzini of Stade Francais, concern had been growing in French rugby circles that some smaller clubs might fold completely. Bourgogne only avoided a bankruptcy filing in 2009 by players agreeing to large wage cuts, and Brive, whose 2009-10 wage bill was €7.2 million, announced that they would cut the budget by 40% for the 2010-11 season. Following the 2009-10 season, Burgoyne were denied a professional license by LNR due to their ongoing financial issues, but the French Rugby Federation reversed this decision on Burgoyne's appeal. Montauban were relegated at the end of the same season after filing for bankruptcy. By the 2012-13 season, the internationalisation of the top 14 had reached such a state that Irish rugby journalist Ian Moriarty, who has had considerable experience covering the French game, asked the rhetorical question, has there ever been such a large disconnect between France's club teams and the international side they are supposed to serve? Quote, he cited the following statistics from that season to make his point. Clermont and Toulon, who were set to play in the Heineken Cup final within days of Moriarty's piece, fielded a total of 8 France-qualified starters out of a possible 30 in the Heineken Cup semi-final matches. Of these 8 players, only 4 were regulars in the French national team. During the 2012-13 top 14, none of the top 3-point scorers were French, and only 3 of the top 10 try scorers were French. Of the players who made the most appearances in the respective positions during that season, only 3 were French. National team coach Philippe Saint-André suggested that several foreign players, meaning players who were born and largely developed outside the country, could make their debuts for France during the team's 2013 summer tour. Moriarty specifically named 5 such players as potential test newcomers. While the JIFF policy worked on one level, the number of foreign players recruited into the top 14 went from 61 for 2011-12 to 34 for 2014-15. Clubs quickly found a way around the rules. Many clubs dispatched scouts to identify top teenage prospects in other countries, and then enrolled them in their academies to start the JIFF qualification process. For example, the 59 players in the 2015-16 Clermont youth squad included 17 from 9 countries outside of France. A more fundamental problem was identified in 2015 by Laurent Labitte, at the time backs coach of the club now known as Racing 92. In an interview with British rugby journalist Gavin Mortimer, Labitte pointed out that France has no organised team sport in its educational system at the primary level. Children must join an outside club in order to play sports. Only at age 15 do youths have the opportunity to attend special sporting schools, but places in such institutions are limited. In turn, this means that young French players are technically well behind the counterparts in many other countries, most notably those of the Commonwealth. Format and structure. The top 14 is contested by 14 professional rugby union clubs throughout France. The domestic season runs from August through to June. Every club contests 26 games during the regular season, over 26 rounds of competition. For many years, the season was split into 2 halves for scheduling purposes, with both halves scheduled in the same order, with the team at home in the first half of the season, on the road in the second. However, this strict order has since been abandoned, although the season is still loosely divided into halves. Throughout the August-June competition there are breaks during the season, as there are also European club fixtures that are played during the rugby season, as well as the Six Nations Championship, in which many top French players are involved, as well as a few players from the other European powers. The schedule may be adjusted somewhat in World Cup years. This was especially true in the 2007-08 season. which ran up against the 2007 Rugby World Cup in France. That season, the top 14 played on all of the Six Nations weekends and on some of the Heineken Cup weekends. The top 14 is organized by the Ligue Nationale.De Rugby, which runs the professional rugby leagues within France. There exists a promotion and relegation system between the top 14 and Pro D2. The two lowest placed clubs on the ladder after the regular season are relegated to Pro D2, while two clubs come up from Pro D2, specifically the champion and the winner of a knockout playoff between the next four teams on the ladder. Starting with the 2009-10 season, the top 14 knockout stages consist of 3 rounds. The teams finishing 3rd through to 6th on the ladder play quarter-finals, hosted by the No. 3 and number 4 teams. The winners then face the top 2 seeds in the semi-finals, whose winners then meet in the final at the Stade de France. In previous seasons, only the top 4 teams qualified for semi-finals. Unlike many other major rugby competitions, the top 14 has traditionally held its semi-finals at neutral sites. Regardless of the playoff format, the top 6 teams had qualified for the following season's Heineken Cup in the final years of that competition, and since 2013-14 a minimum of 6 teams qualify for the European Rugby Champions Cup. Before the 2009-10 season, the 7th-placed team also qualified if a French club advanced farther in that season's Heineken Cup than any team from England or Italy. While the European qualification system was changed for 2009-10, the normal contingent of 6 top 14 teams in the Heineken Cup did not change. The default number of French teams in the Champions Cup has remained at 6, but the method for a 7th French team to qualify has changed from performance in the previous European season to a post-season playoff. For the inaugural Champions Cup in 2014-15, this playoff involved the 7th-placed teams from both England and the top 14. In future years, the same 2 sides will be joined by one Pro 12 side. Previously, in the first phase of the then top 16, the teams were divided into 2 pools of 8. This was followed by a second phase, in which the 8 highest-ranked teams played for semi-final spots and the bottom 8 teams battled against relegation. In 2004-05, the top division consisted of a single pool of 16 teams, with the top 4 teams advancing to a knockout play-off at the end of the season to determine the champion. From 2005-06 through 2008-09, the top division was run with a single pool of 14 teams, again with a season-ending 4-team play-off. The single pool was retained for 2009-10, but the playoffs were expanded to 6 teams. The LNR uses a slightly different bonus points system from that used in most other major domestic competitions. Instead of a bonus point being awarded for scoring 4 tries in a match, regardless of the match result, a bonus point is awarded to a winning team that scores 3 tries more than its opponent. This system makes 2 scenarios that can be seen in the standard system impossible: a losing team earning 2 bonus points, either team earning a bonus point in a drawn match. For 2014-15, LNR further tweaked its bonus point system. The margin of defeat that allows the losing team to earn a bonus point was reduced from 7 points to 5. European competition. The top 14 serves as the qualification route for French clubs in European club competition. Starting with the 2014-15 season, top 14 teams compete in the new European club rugby competitions, the European Rugby Champions Cup and European Rugby Challenge Cup. The Champions Cup and Challenge Cup replaced the previous European competitions, the Heineken Cup and Amlin Challenge Cup. Under the new structure, the top 6 teams on the top 14 table qualify directly for the following season's Champions Cup. The 7th-placed team advances to a playoff for another Champions Cup place. In 2013-14, the playoff involved said top 14 club and the 7th-placed club in the English Premiership. Initially, plans were for the playoff in subsequent years to also include 2 sides from Pro 12 in the Celtic nations and Italy. Due to fixture clashes with the top 14 season, the playoff that will follow the 2014-15 season will involve only 1 Pro 12 side. In the Heineken Cup era, a minimum of 6 French clubs qualified for the Heineken Cup, with the possibility of a 7th depending on the performance of French clubs in the prior season's Heineken Cup and Challenge Cup. All top 14 clubs that do not qualify for the Champions Cup automatically qualify for the Challenge Cup. This means that all top 14 clubs will participate in European competition during a given season. The French clubs have had huge success in the European competitions. The inaugural Heineken Cup, held in the 1995-96 season, was won by Toulouse, which would eventually claim 3 more championships. It would also not be until the 5th championship game until there was no French team in the final. In addition, there have also been 5 occasions where the final was an all-French encounter. The first 3 were all won by Toulouse. The other 2 were victories by Toulon over Clermont in 2013 and 2015. In addition to the French success in the Heineken Cup and Champions Cup, the clubs in the lower European competitions have achieved similar results. The first 4 finals of the European Challenge Cup were all French affairs. Since then, however, only 2 French clubs have won this competition, and French clubs in general have had less success. The revised top 16, top 14 format has required them to pay more attention to league games in order to avoid relegation. The now defunct European Shield, a repechage tournament for clubs knocked out in the first round of the Challenge Cup that was played for 3 seasons from 2003 to 05, was won by a French team each time. Table: French broadcasting rights. Since the 2008-09 season, the top 14 regular season and playoff quarter-finals and playoff semi-finals have been televised by Canal+. Between the 2008-09 season and the 2010-11 season, France Televisions televised the playoff final, but since 2011-12 season, There and Canal+ jointly televised the playoff final. Total wins. The following clubs have won the title. Results. The scores in green are links to the account of each final on the site of the professional league. In French.